Hi, this is Marc Falconberry with phase two of this biography, I guess if you could call it that. I'm going to start where I started before and try to embellish a little more. And if our interviewer person here or them want to interject anything, then I'll try to, expand on it a little. So the church choir, 1958. Let's start there. I was going to Catholic school because my parents wanted me to. I didn't go that long. I didn't really stay with the Catholic Church, particularly. Well, I went to junior high school and the public school. But at grade school, learning the basic harmonies of singing and such, was just all we did. But the school play, the minstrel thing, and my wives later said that they think that maybe what this happened to me, that I never really got any different after this. You'll see what I mean, because it's strictly a race thing. It's something that would never happen now. But what they did is they said, we're going to do Camptown races at the school play. Camptown races. And I goes, yeah, you boys are Negroes. You boys are Negroes. And we go, okay, we're Negroes. Well, because they got us from the choir. That's who we're going to sing Camptown races. And I started to get to be a little bit of a smart ass, and I'm going, well, how come in school it's all the live-long day, and when I sing it with this, it's all de-live-long day? Because then you were in school, you were white kids, and now you boys are Negroes, and that's the way Negroes sing this stuff. And so I said, well, okay, we got to get ready for the play. What do? Oh, well, your costumes and your makeup people are coming. Makeup people? Costumes? Okay. Because, we're 11 years old. So we sit around there, and the first thing they did is they started us on the stove. And on the stove, they took some cork, and they burnt the cork, and then the cork turns black, and you put it all around your face, you're black. And you put it all around your hands, and you turn black. Then there's a jar of cold cream. You put cold cream around your mouth. And you're a minstrel. You boys are Negroes. And then here's your purple shirt, here's your orange pants, here's your, sparkly hat. We're all laughing about which kid makes the best black kid, because you're looking at kids you see every day, but you don't recognize them because So, but I have to put this in there because that was, I had people say, Mark, you're dating yourself. Like, well, so what? Hey, I'm 73 now. It was happened a long time ago when I was 11. You got to go back. No other way to do it. So we go back and, I did the play. So I'm saying this because it was my first actual gig that I sang in front of people as a sort of a performer. And, whether people know me want to say I kind of stayed like that, well, that's up to them. But anyway, as I go through 1960 and 61, there's not much to say that I didn't say before. It was just something where I would go to my grandfather's house and sing along on the TV, and he'd, kind of encourage me. Grandparents, they kind of think you're great doing something, no matter if you're terrible. And he would say, you should sing more. You should, they were really encouraging about it. But my parents were not. My mother was busy working. I grew up, 7 people in a 2-bedroom house. When I realize this now, I was a blues guy from the beginning. I didn't think of it that way. I just thought, well, but this thing about our house is, a lot of houses have a lot of love and all this stuff. And in our house, everybody hated everybody. I was the oldest. So when I was 17, I ran away and I never went home. But before that, it got to be the point where, I had nowhere to practice the guitar. The room with my brother is, I remember practicing, trying to learn scales from Eastern music, which I heard Jimmy Page and those guys do later, which I was glad they do. Kashmir and those type of things, those songs that took Middle Eastern music and then he kind of took rock music and blended it together. And I'd be trying to practice this stuff and my mother would yell, stop. And I'm just going nuts on these scales. And, but when I went to John Angelos' house, he was an only child. I was like their second son. So in the basement, I don't know how they put up with this learning, but they put up with this learning. Somehow, all this stuff, we'd goof around and the drummer would be down there and, he'd play drums and Jesus. The boys are making fun of Jesus Christ down there. So, ridiculous things. We weren't really, we were just goofing around being kids. But that was where the first song ideas came up. And so in the first bands, there were original songs that we did, but they weren't all that well formed because we weren't that good enough to really do much with them, but we thought, well, one thing for sure, if we really do have a band going forward, no matter what year or who it's with, you're going to have some original songs that somebody's got to write, or else you're going to be doing the same songs as every other band's doing, the songs of the day. And although I knew people that grew out of what we did and ended up doing it for a living, where all they did was go to these bars, which people could never imagine nowadays, but there were, well, they call them residence gigs now, but they were really house gigs, I guess you could say, where you would go there and you'd set up your stuff and stay for 2 years or however long they'd have you. And you'd stay there and play 5 sets a night, and the same stuff every night, 9 to 2, 9 to 2, 9 to 2, and they made like a factory type of job out of it. And those guys would laugh at guys like us trying to be creative, because they were making a lot better living than musicians than we were trying to be creative, but we were spinning the big wheels for the big money, thinking, okay, well, you're doing that, but if we actually get a record deal out of this and actually play in other towns and stuff, then we can end up being really successful, and you guys doing this bar routine is going to be, you know, so what, you know? But we weren't thinking about it so much that way. It was just, what kind of person is in your soul, you know? So, you know, that was the same thing with the Motown thing, you know, going down there and auditioning and having the guy tell you to get out, you know, and not seeing anybody that you thought you were going to see down there. But that's just how it was, you know. And as far as the school plays and all that, we were in them, but they was mainly stuff to do with school. It wasn't so much about music. But the first thing that did happen is about 1965, there was a resident band, if you want to call them that was called Bobby Dayton and Daytonas, which did early 60s music, and they were all our schoolmates. I don't think Bobby Dayton was from our school, but the rest of the guys were, and they played longer than me, and they looked down at us because we were trying to do blues and simple type of music, which we could do kind of well because it was so simple stuff, you know, and we kind of were trying to master that. And these guys already could play all this other stuff that, you know, the Beach Boys played and all this stuff. And there was a battle of bands at school. You know, and that's when I learned my attitude, which I still have to this day about it, which is I don't believe in music competitions. People try to get me into those through these stores and through these other things, you know, and I don't think you can actually say, I can't, that one band is better than another. It's just beauty in the eye of a beholder, like looking at your favorite woman or something, and, oh, she's so much to me, look how she moves. And then somebody else, you know, what I got's way better than what you got. And, you know, it's just a matter of apples and oranges to me. So you can't judge things like that. But okay, we're going to go to this thing, we're kids, and no matter how good we played, those other guys were going to win, because they were established, people knew them, they were more popular in school, and we were the rebel kind of guys, and we were not going to be, but they were amazed at how well we did, and it gave us encouragement to maybe not play at our school anymore particularly, but to go on to other things, which we went to Keith Johnstone, the younger drummer. He was like 14 when he joined us, and I was like 16 or 17, but he has played his junior high school, and there was nearly kind of a riot there because they never had a band there. And then when we played, all the kids went crazy there and started breaking shit a little bit. It wasn't terrible by today's standards, but they said, we'll never have another band here again. But we felt like, hey, we succeeded because they never want to have another band here again. So, you know, it was all building up to later. And then, you know, when we made our first record, we went to see those musicians that were playing. We went to see the Dynamics, which people don't remember now, but they had a song called Misery that was a big hit locally in Detroit. And we saw those guys rehearse in the studio, and that's where we met Bob Babbitt, who became one of the Funk Brothers from Motown. He was a bass player, and we got to sit there like I'm sitting here with my friends now, and watch them and see, how do they work out these songs? How do you decide? And what they were basically doing, we learned later, was backing tracks that they were going to turn into on-spec things, which they called on-spec, which means you're doing things as demos, and then if the powers that be like it enough, then they say, okay, well, now we're going to pay for you to go in their studio and do these tracks you've been doing and record them for real for whatever artists they wanted you to do them with. So we learned, and I learned how to be an accompaniment person, to play. How do you do this? How do you play this and be complementary to the bass and the vocals, even when you're not hearing the vocals? You're just doing the backing tracks, and then, I mean, these guys did it off of sheet music, and the sheet music thing was bothering me, and it always bothered me, because as a creative person, I think I saw something when John Lennon said one time, oh, that's just a bunch of antique note formation. I said, that's perfect. I can't say it any better than that. Because the guitar teacher I had a guitar teacher first, at a little music store where everything was mom and pop in those days. And he was a real bastard. He was like, he'd make me go out and get him hamburgers on my time. And I'd come back and, do not put your thumb up like this, brother neck. You got to have it sideways or it's not correct. And I'll teach you stuff. You'll be playing better than those crummy Beatles in 3 weeks. And I'm looking at the guy, and even though I didn't know that much then, I didn't believe him, and I finally just stopped taking lessons. And because guys in my neighborhood, like these guys from the South and stuff, because I grew up in sort of, poor area, I guess you could say, reasonably. There were worse, but anyway, there were guys from the South and they liked guitars and they had electric guitars, and you could go over to their house and, hey, Mark, I'll show you this, give me nothing, I'll just show it to you. Well, how did you play that? Well, man, look this. And it was cool, but I want to tell you, it was a hard work to learn off of these records that you had on these crummy little stereos to try to figure out how these guys were playing it. And I remember one particular part, it might have been Jeff Beck or somebody I went to see, that I was listening to the part on record, and I tried everything for hours. Every hand position, every chord position I could think of, and I couldn't get it, and I couldn't get it, and I couldn't get it. Trying to listen off this record's a lot of work. And then I went to see the guys doing the song. I said, now I'm going to find out how this guy's doing this. And I saw it, and it was this. One finger. That's what I didn't get. I'm doing all this stuff. This is all it is. And that's all it was. And I'm thinking, wow, I got the wrong idea here. I better pay attention. So what I did, which I don't know how many people ever did this as musicians, but what I did at these concerts that were originally ballroom concerts, small ones, because all these guys that came over from England were a step ahead of us for sure, but not much further than that. They didn't know if they're going to make it. They just, I'm not talking about the Beatles and people like that were at big stadiums already. But I would go early, and I'd watch everything. Before it started, I would go to the stage, and I was really interested. Well, look at the equipment this guy's got, and what kind of sound is he going to get out of it? And then I'd watch everything be set up. I'd watch the drums be set up. How do they do this? How are they trying to put a mic here, a mic there to sound good? And then I would evaluate it as these guys played. And I don't care who it was. I don't care if it was blues guys, or sometimes they were remarkable blues and jazz guys because they did it all by talent. They didn't even, half the time they didn't even use microphones. They might use one that a guy had to sing out of. But one of the biggest gigs that I remember going to in 1965, that was a big one for me, was Paul Butterfield Blues Band with Michael Bloomfield and Elvin Bishop and those guys that made the first Paul Butterfield album. I wasn't old enough to drive, but John's mother took us, and we sat there and watched that. And, of course, I became immediately deflated because I can't play like that ever. But man, these guys, there can't be anything better than this, doing this kind of music. They had a mixed band, where it was some black guys, some white guys, but just watching them do all this incredible stuff, of course, then again, I started listening to it later and finding out that, wow, well, these guys did all this, but they didn't write any of it. But I only knew some of the songs, so I thought, well, maybe that's their song, because blues songs, you can't tell that. And that helped me later when I wrote songs. I wrote blues songs because people didn't really kind of want me doing it. They would just soon have a band they could listen to blues songs that they knew, and I was able to sneak them in. I wrote songs, and they never knew I wrote them. They thought, these are old blues songs that we just are obscure. We never heard them before. Well, yeah, that Muddy Waters did that. And then come to find out, well, no, Marc Falconberry did that because he wrote it. But I wrote them purposely like that because I thought they would not be accepted, and I would be back in the same position that I was when I started in kind of rock music, or whatever you want to say then, because I made a conscious decision about this, because I figured, okay, if I want to do the stuff that everybody else does, or like the other bands I'd mentioned that we knew, then there's going to be not much of a future for you. you're going to be playing in these little clubs your whole life. And I remember thinking to myself, I tell one of my old managers this, and he reminded me of it for years, that I told him I didn't want to end up like B.B. King. Now, as B.B. King ended up, was really good later, but at the time, he was playing in 200 or 300 person clubs, every day of the year, and just doing it over and over again in a bus. I go, wow, but if I do rock, if I do the stuff like ballroom stuff with Big Brother Holy Company and Janice and all that later, we could have a future that would be much better. We might have to play gigs that were bigger that we didn't like as much, but we could make a living, and my wife would like me, and she said, "Oh, he's a musician." Yeah, well, we've got a house, and what does he do? Well, he doesn't go to work any place. Well, what does he do? Well, he's a musician. He plays, and impresses people only if they think that you're making a living doing it. If you're not, then you're he's a bum, And so later, I eventually decided that it was much better to be a blues guy and be an older guy, not that successful, which people accepted as what could happen, and you were still loved if you could play well. Whereas if you were an older guy and a rock musician who was not successful, then you were a bum. You were a has-been or never was. And that attitude, I think, still probably exists today, if you think about it. Although I think things have got different, So going ahead with more of this, after the first record we made, which was an original song, which I still have a copy of on a CD that, it was only 2 songs. The rest of the album that we recorded there with some blues stuff, and that was just scrapped. Because in those days, people record on reel-to-reels, and what they would do, even reel-to-reels were the masters, sometimes in a 4-track studio, they wouldn't have any bigger ones, and so you ended up with something, if they didn't really care about it, they were so cheap a lot of times, which I've heard before with other people say this, but they wanted to cut costs. So what they would do is they would take your stuff, they weren't really interested in it, they would record over it. And so they recorded over a lot of the stuff we had, or the stuff would get burned up in a fire in somebody's basement. And so a lot of that stuff in the 60s and that stuff that we did, I don't have any recordings of it because people just recorded it and it wasn't us doing it, and they recorded over the tapes or threw them away, or they destroyed, or the tapes just disintegrated from age because they weren't as strong as the recording tapes or methods today, in any way, means, or form. So when I moved downtown in the late 60s, then we started doing Big Peach Mob. Was like, I had a friend of mine that was in the Jagged Edge. I still see him, which was a pretty well-known local band. Well, I don't remember we were friends and you played, but what kind of music did the Big Peach Mob do? And I had to think about this. Like, it was a mixture of sort of psychedelic and blues and the Doors and that type of stuff, but we wrote it all. So that's why people liked us, because we didn't sound like anybody else. So, which was a good thing. But what ended up happening there was we had a rehearsal studio, and it was really cool in a lot of ways. It was even written about in some of the local magazines, the Fifth Estate and stuff. Well, here's a Pink Peach Mob building on 3rd and Forest. And what was good turned bad. And what I mean by that is we had a place to rehearse, and we had a drummer that was really good at fixing things and doing things as drummers can be. They're good at construction and building things and stuff to beat on things and do, and make things. So he put egg cartons all over the walls, which insulated it so it was soundproof. He built a little stage in there, but the one thing he did that was bad, he went and put the name of our band and painted it on the outside of the building. And it looked cool as hell. But the problem was, everybody in the world saw it. Now they know there's a band practice in there. Well, one night, it was like 4 below zero. I lived 3 blocks away. I could walk there. I'm not taking my guitar tonight home. It could hurt the guitar. We're coming back to the place in the morning to rehearse some more, so we'll just, And so everything was left there, and the next morning, the drummer wakes us up and said, everything's gone. It's gone, all of it. Your guitar, it's all, somebody broke in the side door that was boarded over. It was an old transmission shop, the place, and it's gone. So I was screwed. So, part of the promo you'll see that the MC5 and these people had a benefit for us, which is one of the things I want to be able to prove. Now I can finally prove it because I have the stuff that says it on there. And we didn't get any money hardly out of that because people, if you would believe it, Iggy the MC5 and a lot of these other bands around town played. All of us played every day, sometimes doubles and triples. They were so kind of sick of seeing all of us, including those guys, that we couldn't get anybody too much to come to the benefit to pay to help us. I think we got about $100, which we spent on rent. But anyway, we couldn't buy a guitar with it. But someone came along to make us displace our old manager, my friend, which I didn't want to do, but I was outvoted since we had a three-piece band. Two of the guys voted me out because this other guy came along with a whole lot of money and all this stuff, and he had bought us that equipment, and he took a loan out for it. So he was $10,000 in debt, which was a hell of a lot of money in 1967 or 68. You know, he lost it all by not having that money loan insured, which we didn't know. So, you know, we got our old manager back. She tried to help us. Then we ended up in a place called the Harbor Lights Theater, which turned into a topless place later. I mean, a huge one, because it was a big theater downriver. Really, I want to say Ecorse maybe, but it was on the Detroit River, where Southfield meets, you know, Jefferson. And there were some guys that were syndicate guys, and she got them to invest in us and replace our equipment so we could play there. We did a show with Kenny Rogers in the first edition, because he was doing a psychedelic thing then. A band called the Peanut Butter Conspiracy, of which, you know, came in and bragged to us that they were the biggest heads in the world because they came from San Francisco and they could outstone us at anything that we did, you know, in the dressing rooms before the thing. And so we gave them a joint of the stuff that my buddy had. It wasn't mine, but it was called DMT. And it was like I think what the more modern counterpart of it would be like angel dust or something like that. And we gave it to them, and they thought, yeah, well, you guys, we're the real shit. We'll go on stage, we could do anything. They couldn't do nothing. They got on stage and they fell down on their faces, and they were making all kinds of noises and laughing, and we were laughing harder than they were because, you know, and so they never came back to Detroit again. But these are just stories, you know. You can believe them if you want to. You know, I remember that one of the girls in Kenny Rogers' band, there's only one singer, and you know, we were stoned coming around the corner like we always were a little bit. You know, I stopped this later because I never got too into it, but enough. You know, went around the corner, and my buddy says, "You won't believe this. Frankie Valli's standing there in a tuxedo right by your dressing room door. You know, get out of here. Frankie Valli's not standing there." He was standing there. "Hey, how you doing?" And it was him, because he was going out with that girl that was in that other band, in Kenny Rogers' band. But Kenny Rogers was a bass player then. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't the singer in the band. I don't know if he got the gigs or what. We didn't know him. He came from out of town, of course. But these are some of the gigs that we did. So after our equipment got stolen, we had a gig supposedly up with, you know, recordings with Capitol Records, and they came in and signed every other band in the town almost. They signed up the Third Power, they signed up Iggy, they signed up the MC5, they signed up Savage Grace, all these local bands, Bob Seger, you know, all of these guys. And now they're stepping into the big boys arena, and we're still at the end because we were going to get signed up, and when we had them coming over there, our equipment was gone. And before we got it replaced, those other guys, the window was really, you know, it was closing, and it closed all the way. We were screwed. So the band folded. So then later, after that, 1969, we got with, you know, Brock and Reggie and all that, and then he left to go with Alice Cooper, and that's kind of screwed it up. But I got Angelos to come back in the band because I wasn't the lead singer. And he was, and so, you know, we had a manager that was a radio announcer who was pretty well known, rather not, you know, necessarily mention him that way, but he took us in, and I lived at his place because I was having trouble with my first wife where I was living, and I just stayed with him. And Atlantic Records came in because of his connection, you know, which was a sort of a gay thing, well, really a gay thing, which we weren't into particularly, but there's a lot of that in the music business. There's certain guys that will help you, especially if they can turn you. And anyway, we didn't get turned, but if we would have got turned, like some of these other guys that did play ball with these guys, you know, it could have been different for us, but they offered us $450,000, I think it was, Atlantic, and they came to see us, of all places, from New York, at the Birmingham Palladium. And where we played with well, we played there with a band called The Nice, which was Keith Emerson, and later became Emerson, Lake and Palmer, with different guys other than Keith Emerson. But and then I also did a gig there with Wilbert Harrison, who wrote Kansas City, and we actually backed him up and played with him, and that was interesting because he did 2 sets, and he comes on with a one-man band where he had a light in his bass drum where every time he hit the bass drum, the light would go off, Mr. Kansas City, Mr. Kansas City. Come on, boys, let's go. And what are we going to play? We're going to play Peter Hyder, we're going to play Kansas City, and we're going to play Let's Work Together, which became a big hit of his later for Canned Heat. Anyway, so we played with him and did some shows like that. And it was going pretty well, but then I was ready to leave the band. The band was just doing too much THC and stuff. I mean, it's kind of stuff that you really, you put, I think they were elephant tranquilizers or something. And they were drinking it for breakfast and mixing it in orange juice and stuff, the rest of the guys in the band. I tried it a couple times. I didn't like it. I said, I'm not doing this. I dabbled in things, but I never really got really heavily into any kind of real drugs. Not really. And so I was the straightest guy, which is good now because I'm here to do this interview and these other guys are gone, dead and gone, and most of them. But anyway, they want to know why I was quitting the band at such a time when we were getting really well known. And then we got to the point where we went to the East Town and played the gig with Savoy Brown and Rod Stewart and the Faces. And I remember Ron Wood, ended up with the Rolling Stones later, coming up to me. Oh, hey, mate, how you doing? Well, I see you got some vodka. And somebody gave me a bottle of vodka, and I never liked vodka, but they gave it to me. Just that in those days, people would just give you things to get high on. I had a whole box at home with a skull and crossbones on it, with all these pills and weed joints, and I'd say, listen, if somebody wants them, take it at your own risk, because I don't even know why I'm keeping this. But to be honest with it, at times people would offer me money for stuff, and I'd get low down. Hey man, they got that box, those 2 joints in there. I'll buy them for $10. And okay, and I ended up doing. And a few times it was a little more than that, but I was never like what we would call a drug dealer, But anyway, Ron Wood would give me vodka. I should have went and talked to him. I should have went and I see pictures of these gigs now that surface out of who knows where. And I see guys who are just hangers-on kind of guys, and I would think those guys would have rather known guys like us. But the famous little story I got after that gig that I think is pretty cool, it's worth mentioning. Cream magazine was involved in sort of managing us, and at that time they were the only rock magazine, basically, or magazine music at all, period, in town. And we practiced there. It was on Cass Avenue. And, at this time I was living in Dearborn Heights with my friend and my first wife until that was going south too. But, as it was going, we had to move our stuff back. And we had a roadie who ended up being a big booking agent later. And he's gone now too. But anyway, he was the only roadie, and it was his idea to get anybody he could to help him. We would pay him something, and whoever he could get to help him, if he got give a kid a drink of whiskey, a joint, or we didn't care what he did, he'd get somebody to help him. We were only going to pay him. We only had enough pay to pay one guy to help us. Because in those days, we never moved anything. We just moved guitars, which spoiled me for now. Now I got a lot more appreciation for it, having to do it myself for the last 40 years. But anyway, we figure, who's he going to get to help us? We're going to a party afterwards at Cream Magazine for Rod Stewart and Savoy Brown. They're not having a party for us. We're just the opening act, but we didn't expect it. But, they were invited. So we get there, and I see these 2 little guys, and they're pushing these gigantic speakers that we had up the stairs, where the party was, because, the Cream Magazine offices, they were upstairs where they had a room where you could rehearse. And I looked at the guy, and he looked familiar, and he had an English accent. Oh, just helping out, mate. And who it turned out to be was Kenny Jones, the drummer for the Faces, and Ian McLagan, the keyboard player. And that's who he got to help us. Now, this I don't have proof of. I wish I had a picture of it. And those guys, the English guys, were wonderful. Anybody that thinks that those guys were egotistical, any of them, they're wrong. They were just like us. They were just trying to get ahead. They were great musicians and great guys, almost to a man. The only ones that were a problem most of the time were the managers and people that were associated and hangers-on with them, like anybody. They were the ones he had kind of a problem with, if anybody. But as far as those guys, like I said, they'd help you move your stuff up the stairs. It just, they had the same kind of situation in England that we had in Detroit. It wasn't all that different. So, but when I turned down the record deal, it was bad. And as we'll see later, Rolling Stone did an article on us, and I have it. And because what happened is, after I left the band, I said, "You guys are not going to." I said, "I'm not going to stay in this." Well, the guy from the record company, "Well, why not?" And I said, "These guys, I'm not that into being this blasted and doing it." And the band was ready to kill me. They would, "Shut up! Don't tell them this. We're still going to get signed if you quit." And I said, "Fuck you! I'm quitting." So I quit, and then couldn't understand why I was quitting, because they were going to play at the Fillmore East, which they didn't do, but they did play at the Cincinnati Pop Festival. They played at the Goose Lake Festival, and they told me, "Hey, Mark, you can come and watch us." And I was ready, like, you can imagine what. So I just said, "I don't care. I'm not doing it, and that's it. And you guys get somebody else. Do whatever you want to do. This isn't going to work." So when the Rolling Stone article came out, I was in Madison, Wisconsin, because what happened to me was, and I can't help but make this long. There's no other way around it. All this. What happened was, after I quit, and what always happens to me in my life is everything that happens to me that's bad happens at one time. It's never gradual, never. It's always at one time. Maybe, somebody's trying to test my strength or power, or whatever I say, to bounce back from things. Maybe it was giving me the blues that I needed, to play later. But anyway, I was living at the manager's house, and I came in on a band meeting where everybody, you can kind of see that. If you caught your wife with her new man, and they don't think you're going to show up, and they're going to looking at you like, "Ooh." And so I had to leave, So what happened was, I got a divorce, my car blew up, and I was out of the band all in 1 week. And I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I went to Madison, Wisconsin on the Greyhound bus with a friend of mine, because he said we could start a band there. He knew a lot of people. After I got there for 2 days, he put us with these angels, which I've still got their picture, these 3 girls that were new musicians, and they were college students there, because University of Wisconsin. And it was nice being there in the summer. I kind of sort of even got kind of a girlfriend, for the summer. I didn't know how long I was going to stay. And I ended up in a jam session where I got with a band called the Tales there, Tayles. And that was one of the bigger bands. And, they saw me play at a jam session, and they told me to come and be in the band. So I was doing it, but we hadn't done anything yet, except go to a few concerts together, look at other people play. So anyway, what ended up happening with that was, the Angels helped me out. My buddy that I was going to start the band with, he was involved with the draft somehow, where he was trying to be a minister or something and get a certificate to get out of the army. And I'd already gotten out of it for having a nervous condition, which you can tell I still have a little bit today. Not like then. I got older, grew out of it, but he left, and I was stuck with those Angels, and people I didn't even know. "Don't worry, Mark. Everything's cool. You just stay with us." Those were the times. Beautiful that way. So one day they said, "Mark, you have a package." "A package from Detroit?" "Yeah, cool package. You can go down there and get it at the post office." I go down there, open it up, it's the divorce papers. My wife is. So I go, "Oh man, I can't go back there now. So I don't know what to do." But I had a guy that was a big impresario, and off camera I'll tell you who this guy is, and explain what he is. He's a big deal now, and he started out hanging with us like a lot of these guys did, and I helped a lot of people get into these other things. I was really good at helping other people, not so good at helping myself. But anyway, he talked me into coming back and auditioning. That Mitch Ryder was putting together a new band at Cream there, and also Edgar Winter had a band called White Trash, and he was looking for somebody, and he thought I should come and try out for these bands. And I was thinking, well, should I stay in Madison and play in the local band here with these Angels? Which maybe I should have done, but these other things are bigger, they're getting paid more, that's better, I'll try it. And so I got back, and I went to audition with Mitch Ryder, Billy Levis, I think was his real name. And he, I knew him slightly before, but after I played, he said, "Well, keep practicing." And that's all he said to me. So I went, wow, that wasn't so good. And then I went to about the Edgar Winter thing, and they got Rick Derringer to play, their buddy, and I never even had a chance to try out for that. So here I am stuck back in Detroit, but my one girlfriend, the only woman in my whole life that loved me before I loved her and didn't have to talk her into it, came and decided she wanted to help me. So she helped me with money, everything else, like they all did, bless their souls and their hearts. And I ended up playing with some spec things from some of the guys from Motown. There was a group called the Originals, which people know if you're from those times, because they had some local hits. And so I played with a lot of these soul guys and blues guys and stuff that people didn't know. There were little bands that you don't remember the names of them, but they played a few gigs. Because I had people tell me how many bands you play or ask me. I go, almost 100 if I look at everything where I played just one gig. I played, this stuff I'm telling you about is like almost nothing compared to all that I really did, but it wasn't, a big accomplishment. It was just something that you did if you're a musician every day, And so I did learn how to do a lot of those type of things, musically speaking. And then at that time I started up with the Magic Rape thing, and then nobody said anything about the name except today. But what happened with that was we played at some gigs local, and then we had a guy that wanted to invest some money. At that time, people wanted to invest in you. And the problem that I didn't see at the time with this, that I saw later, was that if they weren't in the music business and they weren't powerful, it doesn't matter how much money they give you or how much they invest in your band. You can only do just so much with that. But we did make some recordings. He bought us a bunch of equipment. And then once again, Marc Falconberry with the equipment bugaboo, after he was done backing us, he took it all back. So he took the PA back. He came over and they got my amp, which was bad because I traded in my amp that I had bought previously, the other band on this, and I just gave it to him. I didn't know what else to say. And then the really funny part about it is I had a friend trying to, restore my old guitar, repaint it, because I wore the finish off and playing it. And that's the one I still have now. It's been repainted, obviously, but at that time he was trying to finish it off, and I had a kind of a crummy case with it, but they had given me money to buy a new guitar case, a nice one. So I bought the new guitar case, and then they came and got that too. When he was refinishing the guitar, they came and took my good guitar case and left me with a cardboard one. So, I still had a guitar, but that's it. Everything else was gone again. So then I went, oh man. And so my girlfriend knew people in New York, and she was courageous. I think this is the year of the water tiger. Just for reference, I didn't say what date this is. This is February 5th, 2022 as we're doing this. And yeah, I think of her because I think she was a tiger people by that, because she was courageous. She taught me courage. Every one of those women taught me something that they were really good at that I wasn't. So we hitchhiked to New York, and she knew some people there, and I went to see the record guy, the guy that was going to sign us before, and I told him, I've got some new things of my own. But his thing was a bad idea to go there with a girl. He had the Satyricon thing going, which you may have never heard of Satyricon, but it was a big Fellini movie. And these were all his go-go boys. They had big hair done up, and they walked around in jock straps. Can I help you? And it wasn't my scene. So he didn't help me. And I went around, but I almost got something. I met a guy in the street in New York, and we were hitchhiking around, and she would panhandle one day, and I tried to go get something, and I wrote kind of a song with parts of this later, and I developed a technique which people didn't say they've used, but I've used it by going to a restaurant and you don't have any money, and you look in there and you see people that look pretty well off, and you see they got a bunch of food, and you watch through the window like you're not watching, and then a lot of times they won't finish all the food. And so as soon as they would finish all the food, I'd sneak in there and sit down at the table and eat the rest of it, and they'd already paid the bill. Things like that you weren't in New York. But anyway, I met this guy Mel on the street, and he said, I knew all these heavy guys. Jerry Wexler, a big guy at Atlantic Records, and he knew him. And I said, well, you can't know him. He says, I do know him. I used to work there, but they fired me for being too stoned. I forget what it was. So I went to some of these guys' places, and they liked what I was doing. But I met this guy, Jerry Wexler, who was the head of it, was a famous guy. I didn't know how famous he really was. And he said, wow, you're from Detroit? And I explained, and they had signed the MC5, had been on Atlantic Records. And I wasn't thinking too much about that. I just said, I got some music. a tape. And so he had me go to the guy that was the head of this magazine there, which I don't know what he was doing, judging music. He said, well, he's going to listen to this. If it's okay with him, it's okay with me. And you can work here. So this guy, he turned on the tape, he listened to 5 seconds for it, he shut it off, he said, we don't need another MC5, just get out. It wasn't much of a fair audition, I didn't think, but, you know, the life was rough. So we came back from New York without anything. Nothing was happening. And then when I came back, I looked up my band, because I was trying to get a record deal, you know, for all of us. And then I found out that those guys in the meantime had rehearsed with Ted Nugent, and they were on the road with them, and I didn't have a band anymore either, because, you know, they couldn't wait around to see what I would get. I didn't blame them, but just that's what happened, you know. So later, I had a band called Blackstone, which was a bar band with a girl in it, which I hardly ever had a band with a girl in it, because at that time, women were like, they were sort of prima donnas in a band. I wouldn't say all bands, but just maybe the ones that I worked with. In other words, you did all the work as a band. You got all the gigs usually. You got all the equipment. They didn't, most of the time, didn't own anything or a microphone. They didn't help you move anything, and they would do 5 or 6 songs a set, and then, you know, collaborate with the schmooze with the band, bar owners, and all that, and then you would be doing all the work. So I thought, well, I'm getting kind of tired of this. It's not, you know, we're doing all the work anyway. So we went on as a 3-piece without her after a while, but we stayed friends. And, you know, then Flax started, and we did all those gigs. And, you know, the most memorable one probably was Ford Auditorium with Steve Miller, you know, which was cool because it was only 2 bands. It was him and us. So, you know, it was nice Ford Auditorium was one of my favorite venues, because it was meant for sound for the Detroit Symphonic Orchestra, I think. So we played that, and then we realized if we don't get a record, do something, we're never going to. Bars were starting up, and the concert scene was dying. Anything at concert, no matter what kind of music you played, all those ballrooms and all that, you know, the kids grew up, was what my friend Pete Andrews used to say, you know, and so they weren't supporting it anymore. And the new kids growing up were supporting it to some degree, but less. So all these ballrooms and all these teen clubs and all these venues we had played that weren't bars, which we preferred playing because it was about the music at those things, not about bars or how much money you're making, they closed. So we had to go to LA. There was where I had a friend, John Angelos, once again, and he was on a record with Ed Davis, who played with Taj Mahal and the Rolling Stones and some other main acts, and he told me to come there because he was going to make a record, and he didn't want me necessarily to play on it, but he was going to help me. And when I got there, his whole thing had caved in, and we just ended up playing some rummy-dum gigs here and there for 2 or 3 years until I came back here and started up with the bar band thing. And then, to make a long story short, going way ahead till the 80s, then I had the West Side Blues Band. We played at Hart Plaza, you know, when they first built it for a blues festival. And there was a little bit of a scene, about 6 clubs, and you rotated it around in those. You know, play one time a month, one weekend, and not somebody else would play. And, you know, some of the places were the Delta Lady, the Union Street, and a few other places around town. And I got a feel for doing the blues and singing it. And people kept encouraging me to do it because he said, listen, you sound really good doing this. I don't think you should go back to what you're doing before, because then there's nothing to go back to. Unless you're going to get some kind of a deal where you're going to be offered, and nobody's going to do it probably for you. So you might as well, if you want to continue in music, you're going to have to cop to this. So I did, and it worked out well in the end, musically speaking. So that's what basically happened, you know, other than you know, some of the stories I could get into part 3. But anyway, after I started the band, then we started playing in a lot of these clubs, a lot of big little concerts here and there, and blues festivals and anything like that. And then I, you know, kind of got more and more comfortable with doing it, and then met a lot of really great musicians, a lot of great players. There's a lot of them are gone now, and some of them, you know, they're still around playing. Unfortunately, with the COVID situation and the recession that happened before and everything, a lot of these places started closing again. But one thing I didn't lose, well, talent, you'd like to think, but the equipment. I had enough, you know, that I got enough to play out of. I don't need that much as, you know, some people might need as a kind of a basic playing person. So this ended, well in a sense with that. What the future is, I can't tell because I don't know if they're going to rebuild this. I was thinking on the best scenario of it was all this stuff crashing because of COVID and recession and everything else, that maybe everything will have a big reset, and people may open up different things that don't exist now, and for whatever time I've got left, I'll be able to do something as long as I'm able to do it, But I saw it coming before it happened, and what I tried to do was to shift out of I was semi-successful doing it. It was a shift out of the bar routine, and because that was only going to depend on money and how much money they're going to make. Whether you bring the people, you do everything and you bring the people for our place, and if you fill it up enough, we'll hire you again. And I'm making the same money I made in the 60s doing rock. They made the same money now, 45, 50 years later. But I could foresee it, so I tried to get private parties and corporate things and private events where it wasn't dependent on how many people were going to spend how much money. The tickets, if they were any, were already paid for because somebody wanted to have a blues event or they wanted to have me. So I went down to Florida and I played down there, and went to Canada some and played there, and more or less kept building up my own little name here. So that's where we sit, and hopefully this doesn't take too long. But is anything you want to say before I sign off with this part?
Nope.
See ya.